The whole town stood in the church doorway, mouths open, eyes wide, as Clara Voss walked past the rich banker waiting at the altar and stopped in front of a poor rancher instead. "Clara," Judge Voss shouted from his seat, "what are you doing? Get back here now." But Clara did not move. She stood beside Ethan Cole, a man in an old brown coat with dust still on his boots. People began to whisper. Some laughed behind their hands. An old woman near the front leaned over and said, "That girl has lost her mind." Mr. Aldridge, the banker, turned red with anger. His fine gray suit shook as he pointed at Ethan. "This man owns nothing. He works a field with his own 2 hands like a common dog." The crowd laughed harder. A few men shook their heads, already judging Clara as foolish, already writing her off as a spoiled girl throwing away her life. Clara felt every eye on her, every whisper like a small knife. Her hands trembled, but she did not step back. She reached out and took Ethan's rough, calloused hand in front of everyone. Gasps filled the church. Judge Voss stood up so fast his chair fell backward with a loud crash. "You will not do this, Clara. I forbid it." Clara turned to face her father, her chin lifted high, her voice steady even though her heart pounded like a drum. "You raised me to obey," she said, "but you never asked what I wanted." The church went silent. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. "I choose him," Clara said, her voice breaking but strong. "Poor or not, I choose him." Judge Voss's face turned white, then red with fury. "Then you choose nothing, no money, no home, no family." Clara did not cry. She squeezed Ethan's hand tighter. "Then nothing," she whispered, "is enough for me." The whole town stared, stunned, unsure if they had just watched a foolish girl ruin her life, or something far braver than any of them understood. The wind rattled the thin walls of the small wooden house as Clara stirred a pot of watery soup over a weak fire. Her hands, once soft and smooth, were now rough and red from work. She did not complain, but her eyes often drifted to the door, waiting for Ethan to come home. That evening, a fine black carriage stopped outside their house. Clara froze, spoon still in her hand. A well-dressed man stepped out, his boots shining, his coat clean and pressed, nothing like the clothes of anyone in this poor part of town. He knocked. Ethan opened the door. "Mr. Cole," the stranger said, removing his hat with a respectful bow. "The papers are ready just as you asked." Clara's spoon slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. "Papers," bowing to Ethan. Ethan glanced at Clara, then quickly stepped outside, shutting the door behind him. Clara ran to the window, watching the 2 men speak in low, careful voices. She could not hear the words, only see the stranger nodding again and again, like a servant obeying a master. When Ethan came back inside, his face was calm, too calm. "Who was that?" Clara asked, her voice shaking. "Just business," Ethan said simply, hanging his coat. "Business? What business does a poor rancher have with a man like that?" Ethan did not answer. He only smiled gently and touched her cheek. "Trust me, Clara." Days later, more strange things happened. Workers repaired their broken fence without asking for a single coin. "Mr. Cole already paid," one man said, tipping his hat before walking away. Paid with what money? They barely had food some nights. Clara's mind spun with questions she was afraid to ask out loud. Was Ethan hiding something shameful, something dangerous, or something far bigger than she could imagine? That night she lay awake beside her sleeping husband, staring at the cracked ceiling, her heart pounding with fear and wonder. Who exactly had she married? Thunder cracked across the sky as Judge Voss rode up to the small ranch, his horse kicking up mud. He threw a stack of papers at Ethan's feet like garbage. "Sign them," the judge barked. "Sell your land, boy, or I'll take it from you myself." Clara stood in the doorway, gripping the frame, her heart pounding. Other ranchers stood nearby, heads down, already defeated, already signed away. Nobody dared stand against Judge Voss. Ethan bent down slowly and picked up the papers. He did not shake. He did not look afraid. He simply looked up and stared straight into Judge Voss's eyes. "You cannot take," Ethan said quietly, "what you do not own." The judge laughed, a mean, sharp laugh. "This whole valley will belong to the railroad soon, whether you like it or not." "No," Ethan said, his voice calm but heavy like stone. "It won't." He walked into the house and came back holding old, yellowed documents, their edges worn from years of hiding. He placed them in the judge's shaking hands. Judge Voss's eyes moved across the papers. His face went pale, then white as snow. This can't be real," he whispered. "Every ranch," Ethan said, "every river, every tree, this whole valley belongs to me. I bought it years ago, long before I ever met your daughter." Gasps rippled through the crowd of ranchers. Clara's knees went weak. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her husband, her poor, humble rancher, owned everything. "You lived like a beggar," Judge Voss shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief and fear. "I wanted to see," Ethan said softly, "who would love me, and who would only love my money." The judge stumbled backward, his power crumbling before everyone's eyes. The same ranchers who once pitied Ethan now stared at him with wide, stunned eyes, some in fear, some in awe. Clara stood frozen, tears filling her eyes, her heart racing. The man she married for love was the most powerful man in the entire valley. Judge Voss dropped to his knees in the mud, his fine coat soaking through, his proud face broken with fear. "Please," he begged, his voice shaking. "Don't destroy me. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." The ranchers stood silent, watching the powerful man who once controlled the whole town, now trembling before a man he had called nobody. Ethan looked down at him, his eyes calm, not cruel. "I don't want revenge," Ethan said quietly. "I only wanted the truth." He turned to Clara. Her eyes were wet with tears, her hands still trembling from everything she had just seen. Ethan walked toward her slowly and took her hands in his. "I hid everything," he said softly, "because I wanted someone to love me. Not my money, not my land, just me." Clara's lips trembled. "And I did," she whispered, "even when we had nothing." "You didn't marry a poor rancher," Ethan said, his voice full of warmth. "You married a man who only wanted to be chosen for his heart." Tears rolled down Clara's cheeks, but she was not sad. She felt proud, prouder than she had ever felt wearing silk dresses or living in her father's grand house. She had given up everything for love, and love had given her back more than she ever imagined. Judge Voss slowly rose to his feet, humiliated, his power gone, his pride shattered. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. "I was wrong," he said quietly, "about him, about you." Clara said nothing. She simply turned back to Ethan and rested her head against his shoulder. From that day forward, people in Red Hollow no longer whispered about poor Clara or that foolish rancher. They spoke instead of Ethan Cole, the quiet man who owned the whole valley, yet chose kindness over pride and truth over riches. And Clara, once a defiant daughter, was now known simply as a woman who chose love, and was rewarded with a lifetime of it.